and welcome to today's webinar. Please use the first minute to get settled in, and please chat where you are listening from. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So good morning or good afternoon. My name is Haley, and I will be your host today as we discuss today's topic, Candid Conversations with IT Leaders. This is brought to you by Zayo and hosted by VIB. Today's webinar will be about 45 minutes, and we will save the last 15 minutes for Q&A. Please use that Q&A button at the bottom of your window to ask any and all questions. We'll do our best to answer those questions for you, but for those who we don't get to, we'll follow up with after. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker up, Gustav, and we will go ahead and launch a poll to get the conversation started.
Thanks, Haley. And we have a poll jumping up. It's my privilege to be with a distinguished series of panelists, and we're going to have a lively conversation about the strategic challenges in IT. I'm Gustav Hoyer. I'm the Vice President of Architecture and Engineering at Zayo, and I look forward to sharing the experience with this panelist. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I'll begin with Pritham, if you would introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Pritham Kirkov here for Peak Internet. We are focused mostly on the tier 3, tier 4 service provider side. We are a rural service provider, and that's what we are trying. The buzzword right now is closing the digital divide. So that's what our focus is. So.
Great, welcome. Craig.
Hi, everybody. I'm Craig Williams. I'm CIO at Ciena. Been here about 6 years, based in Raleigh, North Carolina at home. Bit of a hybrid worker. Ciena is a network solutions provider. Most of our equipment that we make, networking equipment at that, is optical. And we also do software and services, but most of our gear is for large content providers that you probably know of.
Great. It's great to have you. Steve.
Hi, Steve Adler. I'm the CTO of Fan Controlled Sports and Entertainment, located in not so sunny San Diego, California right now. FCSE builds a fan-facing platform for fan-controlled sports, which means the fans control how the games go. We have fan control football, where the fans call the plays. We're launching fan control basketball, where the fans will be involved in running that league. And we'll be doing other sports in the future. And it's real players on a real field or a real court playing a real game, and the fans control every aspect of the league.
Great, thanks for joining us. And Jeff.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm Jeff Yee. I'm the CEO of Airwave. Airwave is an online marketplace for wireless operators to connect with property owners to deploy networks. It's used by 5G network operators, mobile operators. It's used by wireless broadband providers to provide internet, and it's also used by IoT service providers.
Great, thank you for joining. I want to dive right in and begin with, across this spectrum of companies that we all represent, a lot of business forces, particularly macroeconomics, are changing in different ways around us. We hear it in the news, but I'm curious for each of you, the business forces that are creating the most pressure for you in your IT capacity. And let's go ahead and we'll start just in the order of our introduction. Pritham, do you want to take that first? And we'll just go through each of you. Love to hear an answer.
Sure. So since I'm a service provider, the current challenges that I have is mostly from providing or accepting the customer demands. From the bandwidth perspective, that's the high and ever changing. So we are going from a GPON to XGS-PON to XUE. Those are the different technologies that we use. So how to design the network for the future, how to keep it more reliable for the future is the main. The next one is the cybersecurity aspect of the IT side that ever changing in our field. So that's another pretty major focus that everyone here is on. And the current topic of digital transformation is on the process automation side, how that can be taken care, basically from streamlining all the processes.
Great, Craig. What are the pressures facing you?
Yeah, I think for us, it comes down to talent and culture. And I know it sounds kind of, cliche in a lot of ways, but being a 30-year-old plus company, we got a lot of tradition and a lot of success to get us to this point. But, in this new digital world, it's all about change. And I like to think that, we have to skate to where the puck is going, not so much where the puck is at now. But with that means a lot of transparency and innovation and risk taking and all that, and we just can't take it for granted. So a lot of my time is really focused on the talent and the culture aspects of IT.
Interesting. So we've heard about increased demand projection, the whole question of digital transformation, cybersecurity. You mentioned staffing teams and all of that. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, there's because we're fan facing and trying to aggressively build our fan base, there is constant pressure to innovate, come up with new interesting ideas and integrate those into the fan experience and digital integration with the physical game. So figuring out how to bring technology into play with sports that have been around for decades in such a fashion that's additive and disruptive in a good way instead of disruptive to the game is a constant challenge for us, but also very exciting. It gives us an opportunity to do some really interesting things all the time.
A digital transformation in a material way of the game itself in some respect.
Yeah, we're reinventing the way fans engage with sporting events.
Yeah, no doubt there's we'll come back because I'd like to explore some of how you've already succeeded at what you've done. But Jeff, what about you as we survey the landscape together?
Yeah, a big focus area is just solving the digital divide, right? It's easy for us. We're all on a Zoom call like this, but 4 billion people around the world that still do not have access to the internet at home. But even here in the US, we take it for granted. We think, oh, everyone has high-speed internet, but they don't, right? That's why we have major government stimulus money that is just coming down now to local governments. That'll be provided to a lot of service providers out there. But I think the forcing function that really exposed the problem was COVID, right? When we learned that kids could not get online to do school when they really had to, people that couldn't be able to access work when they needed to. So really, we're on a mission to be able to make sure that we're providing high-speed internet to those that don't have it, not just in the US, but everywhere abroad.
It's interesting that as a network company, Zayo, we ourselves see that as mature as some of these technologies seem to those of us in this industry, how non-uniformly pervaded into society that capability is. Rural areas, large populations that aren't able to connect into the digital economy in so many respects. And so that springboards us into, and maybe Steve will come back to you because the question of digital transformation, you're doing it on a time-honored game and a consumer-facing offering. But maybe if you would expand a little bit on when you hear the word digital transformation, what does that mean to you? And walk us through what that's been, and then we'll talk to some of the others.
Yeah, so our guiding precept is whenever there's an opportunity for fans to make a decision in the league, then the fans should be making that decision. And some things are relatively mundane, such as what's the team's name going to be, or what's your team's logo going to look like, or should we, how do we want to handle ref call challenges on the field? So it's building simple voting infrastructure to do that. But then you get into things like what we supported for football, where the fans actually call the plays that the offense is running on the field. And there were several components to that were fan facing, player facing, coach facing, game day ops facing, and thinking through the problem and making sure you're covering all the bases so the experience of all those constituents as part of the league is a positive one. And as you might imagine, calling plays for a football league, that has to happen very fast. So is a time effective one. So it's thinking into the corners on all these things, making sure that we have all our bases covered and we're building stuff that's solid and doesn't break. And as we talked about before, software always breaks. So being able to come up with backup plans for when things do break, being able to be nimble and respond quickly when we have to handle issues is also a big part of that.
So your digital transformation really extends directly to your customers. And in fact, that's part of your journey. Some of us are internally facing, or we automate our organization. So I'm curious to hear, Craig, maybe you want to talk about what does digital transformation mean in your context?
Yeah, and being, a 30-plus-year-old company, it's a little different for us, but I think in theory, I would say it's basically a radical shift and, people, process, and tooling. But in practice, it's really simplified, I think, for us is just it's orchestrated change management. Because my job is really just change and constantly evolving and pushing change. And it's really, that's what it's become for us.
So elaborate on that, the digitization of that change. How does that materialize? We know that you're bringing change. Talk about the transformation part of that.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff we do are just the back-end services that everyone has, when they log in every day. And of course, that's what they do to be productive every day. But we have a lot of business processes, quote to cash type processes that have been around for years. And those have to be rethought, everything from the handoffs with new technologies or just the integrations with other systems and people, and even the training in between. So all of those things we have to rethink, because what we did build, even a couple of years ago might not be fit for the future. So we're constantly looking at ways to improve our business process transformation. And I would say the underlying factor a lot of the times is really about our data strategy and really investing heavily into our data program.
Okay, so Jeff, to you, you're part of digital transformation in a different sense. You're unlocking the world of digital economy for new people. What does that mean for you in your context?
Yeah, digital transformation, I see is just taking things that were routine, maybe manual tasks before, and automating it. Typically with software. And I'm sure everyone can has their own examples, but I'll give an example from my industry. In the wireless industries, you build networks and you need access points, cell sites. It's been a very manual process. Surprisingly, many years into the internet, a lot of knocking on doors. Can I use your property, and put a big tower up there? Lawyers that get involved and exchange contracts. And as we go from 4G into 5G, the next generation wireless, there's literally millions and millions of sites that need to be created. So what we're doing is actually transforming that industry, taking it more digital. And so again, it's just a lot of these routine tasks and making it scale with software.
Okay, fascinating. So taking the engagement of acquiring new easement or property access or other things and making it more efficient through
putting it online, where you don't need people, walking around knocking on doors. In fact, you reduce not only the number of resources, people, but also the time that it takes to get it done too.
Okay. And Pritam, how about for you? Digital.
Sure. So peak vision is connecting communities and providing an exceptional customer experience. And the experience is a word that is everyone focused, everyone across the world. I think if you want to survive in any industry, that's what you're trying to achieve. And for peak to do that, with the changes right now, we are focused on the process transformation and the culture transformation, because the employees are not everyone open to that change, that we are going from the automation side. I have employees who are working for the companies for 10, 15 years, and definitely a change is a change for them. So for right now, the digital transformation mostly is focused on streamlining all the processes that we have. And some of the processes, as Craig mentioned, is ever changing. Every day you learn, and you have to improve. You can't just go with what you have in the past. The other thing too, with COVID, from a service provider perspective, the demand for internet was so high, and with all the restriction, we had to take down processes where someone has to sign a service order from a tier 3-4 service provider side. It was all manual. So COVID also pushed some of the changes on us to make that happen, to go some of the things that were manual before to go automation. So in general, right now we are focused on the cultural and the process transformation piece of the digital transformation.
So a theme here definitely emerging, digital transformation is being approximately equal to digitizing process, digitizing the way people interact in new ways. And even to some extent that, Steve, is what you're doing as well, the way fans interact with the sport, you're digitizing these things. It's been my experience that a phrase I've used elsewhere, that silicon is very easy to instruct, but carbon is a little trickier. Essentially, the human part of these transformations. And Pratham, you mentioned exactly that. How do you bring, and how are you bringing your organizations, your stakeholders through this digital journey, that the people part of the solutioning? What's working? Is there a technological element that streamlines that? Is it just a lot of engagement, a lot of conversation? What's working, what's not working as you transform? Yeah.
Sorry. To start, the first thing what we did is we really wanted to see what peak focus is in the future. So we had a strategic planning session with the management and the board to go over the mission and the vision. And once we finalized the mission and the vision for the company, I think that created a good background for the employees, because everyone has a lot of questions when you come with a change. And definitely when a culture change, especially in an environment when the manpower is a big issue, like finding the right skill set, you don't want to lose employees. So you want to make sure the change is communicated in a way that is very positive. And again, those are some challenges that we face from the culture perspective. But having regular meetings, I have a small group of team, so that even works better for me as compared to others on the panel. I think for the first couple of months, having regular meetings on a daily basis, the employees help a lot to focus really on what the goal of the company is. I think that helped a lot for me.
So alignment to the company mission and reminding people of the end point of the transformation journey. Anyone else want to comment? How is that working? Craig, you mentioned it. Jeff, anyone?
Yeah. So pre-pandemic, we just took a lot of risks. And in IT, what we said is we were going to start over as an IT team. And that meant everything from the network to the collaboration tools and installing video, going to cloud, everything. And it just so happens that it worked out for the pandemic. And of course, we didn't plan for the pandemic, but we closed our data center, the last one we had. And right as the pandemic came over, or the COVID came over to the US, and everyone worked just fine. But all these new tools and things that we had put in, it made a lot more sense because people could work in this new way. And again, the tradition of a 30-year-old company, that wasn't so easy to pull off, but we just said, look, we're going to go through some, we're going to go through the dark forest. We're going to take some arrows as we run through, but we know once we clear the forest, we'll be better on the other side. And that's what we did. But that's also now positioned us pretty well to experiment a lot in new technologies and new business process endeavors and things like that. So we had to go through that sort of credibility check first. And now it's just more of how we work. We have to take risks in order to survive long term, and it's not so much of a big deal, if you will.
If I could ask a follow-up, those experiments, is there a specific one that comes to mind where you're really seeing the digitization of these processes, these interactions? It's challenging, and that you're able to navigate it. Anything you can share specifically?
Well, I think in all of these, and especially in the business processes stuff that we're doing, we're taking multiple teams from different parts of the company together. And normally they don't even talk together, but they live together because of this business process that's been there. It's just handoffs, and they don't even see the handoffs and the inefficiencies that have been created. But when you create a team and you get them together and you start unraveling the real experience of how bad it is, and you show competitive information about how some of the other companies are able to push a button and get a result, but we can't, that then is a force multiplier to get people on the same page. And then it's a project, and I think people then buy into the whole idea that, oh, I really need to lift my head up and work together across the company, which typically doesn't happen. When you've got an accounting group in finance, or you got a supply chain, and you got all these different teams that don't normally orchestrate, but that process binds them, you really got to figure out ways to pull them together.
So I'm going to jump over to Steve for a minute, because the whole change management question, when you have a retail sort of operation customer, you can't do lots of training. I'm assuming as you introduce new technical capabilities, in some ways they have to be self-adopting across your community. But I wonder if you can talk about that both externally, but then even internally, because your teams, it sounds like your pace of innovation is very, very aggressive. And I have to imagine that's putting pressure on your processes and the way you operate as a company.
Well, for our fans, we have to tutorialize, and we can do things on our digital platforms for that, as well as in the broadcast. So we're broadcasting our games. We'll have our commentators get on and tell fans how to do stuff. And we're going to lean into that more heavily. But actually, one of the bigger challenges is internally, because we've got football players that are used to been playing football for years. We've got coaches that have been coaching for decades, and we're changing the way the game works for them. So it's been, some of these folks have never held a tablet in their hands before, and getting them to understand that the fans are calling the plays and the digital systems that they have to pay attention to and react to has been interesting for us. And some folks take to it very quickly, and others take a little more care and feeding so they understand it. So it's and we have to invent all new in-game processes. For our first season of football, I wrote a 7-page game day script that told every color-coded every constituent in the game what they had to do when certain events happened, either on the field or in the app, that involved a digital integration, because nobody had ever thought that through before. So it's constantly a learning experience, and it takes a lot of focus and discipline by the entire team to make sure that it operates smoothly.
Yeah, interesting that you would have non-technically savvy participants inside of your organization, and they're on their own change curve. You're digitizing their world, and so you do have a real change envelope there. Externally, Jeff, you mentioned as you're engaging, particularly as you're trying to expand your footprint, you're trying to digitize some of those interactions. How is that going? Because these are external parties that may or may not be customers. In some cases, they might be partners or vendors or suppliers. Lessons learned, how's that working out?
Yeah, lessons learned, folks. You're right. It's a lot of partners and customers that use our software and change as we digitize that. So what works and what doesn't work? What works is explaining to an executive with a P&L that here's software that can do it cheaper, faster. What typically doesn't work is when the buyer is also the person that you're automating their job, right? And that's the carbon part that you mentioned, which is people are concerned that here's software that will take over my role one day. The way to explain it in a growth industry, at least, is this helps you to make your job easier. You're trying to scale faster. And so that's our mission, is to try to explain to people that, in the wireless industry, at least, it's, if we're going to fill that last 4 billion people that don't have internet, we need to get together and do this and do it the right way.
It's some of you may have encountered the psychological construct of the scarcity versus the abundance mindset. Maybe you've encountered that at various points, but as I often consider, when you digitize a piece of work, you're streamlining it and you're taking it out of a person's day in and day out life, and you're shrinking its space. And the challenge there is the person's going to say, you're taking things away from me. This is part of my value contribution. And now it's being run on a server somewhere. And I think there's always more work to be done. The beauty is you digitize things. There's plenty of work to go around. And often when people are able to embrace that, they realize, oh, this doesn't need to be resisted. In fact, I should embrace this because I want to get on to that next piece of interesting work. I want a chance to do that next thing. And I can take this routine thing and move it aside. Is that resonate with any of the rest of you, or do you have a similar experience to what Jeff's mentioning?
I'll say that yes, it does for us, and sort of what I was mentioning before is once you have a few wins in your pocket, it's a little easier to pull off the next one, and it's a little easier to pull off a bigger win at that. But you have to be really cautious, and we never take anything for granted in how we do these, because it's all comes down to change management. I mean, you can have the greatest idea, the greatest plan in place, but if you don't have change management really thought through, then it can be the best solution in the world, but it can, blow up on you. So that's what we do.
And
Yeah,
go ahead, Pratam.
I agree with Jeff. Like when I can totally speak on from the vendor perspective. When we have a new software, the team thinks that it's going to replace someone's job, but it's really not the real reason. It's more of how we can be more efficient. And again, with the current situation, that there is not much skilled manpower that is available out there today that can help everyone, right? So digitization, automation, I think that's gonna be the key, because we would like to focus having less manpower and still do the same job. I think that's where things are gonna be. But I totally get what Jeff was trying to say. Is convincing even from me to my employees is a challenge too, because you don't want to send the wrong message that time as well.
Yeah, it's interesting in our organization because the operational components inside the company are constantly begging for us to automate things for them, because we're in this constant state of discovery where we implement these new digital integrations with the physical sport, and all of a sudden the ops guys figure out, well, now we have to do this and this and this and this, and I have to do it manually. How can you make my life easier? So I have a never ending wish list in my backlog in Jira of stuff that I have to build to try and support these guys that we have to prioritize and feather in with all the fan-facing features we have to build.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true in a new venture such as you're engaged in. I'd like to pivot a minute. And so we've talked about the soft side or the human elements, but let's touch on the silicon part. And when you think about your infrastructure and the technology platform that you're operating your business off of, what's working, what's succeeding, what's challenging, what's getting in the way when you think about the asset base, the infrastructure base?
Is that just open to anyone, Gustav?
Yeah, I was going to say it's open question. I know that I could prime the pump a little. Steve had shared when we were getting to know each other about in terms of his infrastructure, operating on a cloud has been advantageous. It's allowed you to accelerate quite a bit. Maybe you want to touch on that and we'll springboard to the others.
Sure. So our entire infrastructure is running in two availability zones in AWS. So we have a massively scalable services stack based on Docker container and Fargate orchestrate, the AWS Fargate orchestration technology that AWS provides, which enables us to scale quickly and massively against spikes in demand. And also distributed across two physical availability zones. So if a volcano erupts in Oregon and covers up an Amazon data center, we have another data center that's already hot and operational and can just scale up against the the current demand. So that's served us very well, and we tend to lean pretty hard into new service offerings that Amazon releases. And we found that makes us very nimble and to be able to operate more efficiently. So this isn't new, but it's an initiative we want to get into, is replacing some of our container workloads with on-demand compute. So now when something comes in, it spins up compute, services the request, and it goes away, which is even more operationally and cost effective than the containerized workloads.
Great. Anyone else?
I'll share a little bit. So for us on the infrastructure side, we invested heavily in SD-WAN. So we really redid our entire global footprint on the network side and invested in cloud and went there, and collaboration tools and Zscaler for security and a lot of good steps forward. But now in this hybrid world, I think we have to rethink the network again, because even SD-WAN, I'd argue, is it really what you need if you don't have but maybe half or maybe even a quarter of the population back in an office? And so we're looking at really maybe like an elastic network or a network as a service idea. So maybe it's pay as you consume networking, because it really doesn't make sense to overbuild everything that you would have typically done at an office when you might not have the people come. Another thing for us is really just keeping really close eye on security. And, you know, as you guys all know, here on the call, everyone here, I'm sure, it changes every day and you can't let your guard down. But what you can't do either is you can't just rely on the InfoSec team to deal with it. You have to figure out how you get your IT people, whether they do code development, they run the network, they run cloud, everything in between, they have to be security experts. And that's really, you know, I wouldn't say it's holding us back, but it's definitely makes us all nervous about what the future would look like at the rate it's all changing.
Absolutely. Jeff, anything infrastructure?
Yeah, so infrastructure, since we're in the wireless business, at its core, it's pretty simple. You put up a wireless radio and you connect it to the internet. And what's really kind of the success, you know, for us is partnerships like Zayo, right? Because for the next generation of wireless, you have to connect it to high-speed internet fiber. And to be able to quickly deploy, it's helpful for us to know where are those fiber endpoints to be able to construct radios. So that's what's working really well. I think what's holding us back in the whole industry is just the time that it takes after that. Once you identify this would be a great place to put up a wireless radio, it's all the other things that, you know, need to be done, from, you know, analysis of that building and how many customers and what areas will be able to get coverage, to permits, that it just takes a long time to get the equipment up and running. And so it's that frustration, you know, go back to digital transformation. You just have to identify what all those problems are and then see what can we do to improve those in the future. And hopefully a lot of those can be automated with software.
So from that, we touched on security, and I think that's certainly a risk factor across any technology platform, we know, and it's a constantly changing landscape. So given that, are there other areas of risk that you're tracking? Craig, you had mentioned staff and labor, and in our industry, being able to bring talent to the field, as it were, to use a football metaphor, to get talent on the field is challenging in its own right. How are you seeing your digital transformation influenced or affected by that risk, or are there other risks that you're really tracking beyond security that's you want to share?
Yeah, for us, I mean, if you don't attract the right talent or you don't stoke the right culture to continue with the mindset of change and digital change and all the things around transparency, risk-taking, innovation, all that stuff, if you don't really do that purposely, you might not have a future, quite frankly, or at least the strong of a future in what you're trying to accomplish. And I know that the more we employ and the more we gravitate towards this kind of culture that we love to be a part of, the better our execution is. So for us, that's really where it really has to be centered, because the projects are not as hard if you have a great team who takes the risks, who thinks about the change management you have to do, and are open and collaborative, but that doesn't happen by accident. So that's why I always have to go back to that challenge.
Creating a culture, the place that is really enables your talent to be motivated and people to lean in. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. Especially, and again, picking on a 30-plus-year-old company, it doesn't come naturally for us. If we were a small startup, maybe in the valley somewhere, it'd be a little easier when you're all in the same room or have the same mindset of what you're trying to accomplish. But for a bigger company and for a company that's been around for a long time, you really have to think differently about that.
Yeah, in some ways, I've heard the culture is described as the operating system for the company itself. It defines a lot of how interactions occur.
Right.
And can be a real key enabler. And it sounds like, how are you navigating? Are you bringing new cultural norms? What specifically are you doing to lean in there?
Yeah, so we take a lot of risks. We like to have a lot of fun. Anyone who's part of IT knows that's what we do. We host all hands on a regular basis that we start with talent, and we have new people who demonstrate a talent. And that's a little embarrassing, but it's a lot of fun because people laugh and giggle, and then they bond through that. And keep in mind, this is a global team, so it's hard to get to know people otherwise. But we always start everything with talent. I've got a little sticky right here. It's talent's the #1 operating priority that we have, but it doesn't come natural. I have to remind myself of that every day I log in. Did I communicate? Did I talk to someone? Did I do a skip level? What am I doing in the Teams channel to spark a conversation? Things like that. I have to remind myself, even though it's the #1 priority we have, I have to remind myself to do that. So it has to be a forward thinking kind of attitude and a practice, if you will.
Pritam, how for you, risks? Do you have similar risks? Are there others that we haven't discussed?
Definitely, the manpower is one, but for us right now, supply chain is the biggest risk, because we have projects there's a lot of funding and grants available, but there's the supply chain issue is the biggest risk for us to really complete the project in a timely manner, right? I believe everyone here is going through the same, but the lead times and everything, I think that's another challenging factor for us is, okay, how to really get the project completed in time with all these issues, how much planning that needs to happen and other things. But so for us, it's more supply chain and the manpower.
Are you bringing some digital transformation to address that risk, or how are you dealing with the supply chain risks that are presenting to your organization?
So from our perspective, basically what we're trying to do is just maybe like a project management tool that we have to make sure what projects we are planning for the next couple of years, and then prioritizing those and maybe getting ahead of the curve in ordering stuff. Because right now, even from the equipment manufacturers, is 8 to 9 months out to get something out for us. So that's the challenge for a tier 3, 4 providers like us in the market, because tier 1s get the big chunk of the pie, and whatever remaining comes to us, and we have to really plan accordingly for that. So.
Well, back to culture, Steve, I'm intrigued. You mentioned the relentless pace of innovation, the pressure on your business to constantly roll out new, and that must have culture implications as you look across and motivating that constant pace of innovation. How are you addressing that need? I'm sure it's a relentless appetite for new things.
I don't know if I understand the question. How am I handling the pressure and motivating the team?
Yeah, and just culturally, as talent comes into play, the innovation comes from people. And so I'm just connecting the dots a little bit with what Craig was talking about, culture, or is that an area of risk at all? Or do you have different risks that you're paying attention to?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of people at the company think, well, we're doing so much cool stuff that everybody wants to work here, but there's so much demand for strong talent out there. It is hard to find people constantly. Um, so that is certainly a challenge for us. But motivating people to work on the new and innovative pieces and execute around an aggressive schedule isn't a really big challenge because there's this constant state of excitement within the company about what we're building. I mean, we really are pushing the envelope on so many different axes that people are excited to be participatory in that. So there really is a culture of, participating in changing the face of sports as we know it today. And that really motivates the team to go above and beyond to get stuff done. But that being said, we're constantly making bets on innovations and doing things that haven't been done before. And we just played a bet out last week in Atlanta and had our fingers crossed on something we didn't know if we could do or not, and it actually worked. So we were pretty happy about it. But that'll happen several times in a roll up to a season where we've got an idea, we're trying to figure out how to do it, and we've got to come up with a very unique and inventive process. Here's one of my chip plates.
Okay, great. Well, we'll springboard from there, that innovation. And Jeff, I'll bring the next question to you and ask, given the risks and some of the dimensions we've talked about, where are you investing in your IT? So as opposed to maybe on the product side in your internal IT capabilities, where are you investing and focusing?
Yeah, well, the Airwave's a software company, so the obvious answer for that is just more software development, hiring more engineers that can build out the new features that we need. But the non-obvious answer is data collection, right? So developing software without the underlying data is sort of meaningless. So, and especially in our case with the marketplace, the more data, the better. We want access to more properties. Where I mentioned Zayo and fiber endpoints, where are those endpoints? So we have a big part of our business that is out there just gathering all the data and making the software just more effective.
So when you talk about making the data more effective, what does that look like in practice? How are you doing that internally?
Yeah, so examples in our industry would be, so a lot of what we do is visualization. It's maps of where are the ideal locations to be able to put wireless cell sites. The data that we need for that is what are the surrounding buildings look like, the mountain, the terrain, anything that would block a wireless signal. Where can I get access to high-speed internet? So all those data points we need to be able to process and try to, using an algorithm, determine what's the best locations to deploy wireless access points.
So some advanced geospatial analysis, you of course need to ingest a lot of real world telemetry and then do some analysis to do that placement.
And that takes a lot of data and a lot of different types of data too.
Yeah, disparate sources, no doubt. You're having to subscribe to a lot of different providers of data. Is that?
Yep, we do.
Management of that, and no doubt. So for the rest of you, when you look at IT investment, that's a sense of where you're betting or where you're mitigating risk. Where are you most invested? Maybe not even numerically, but in terms of the focus or the energy or the leadership attention that you're putting into your IT.
For us,
go ahead, Steve.
Craig.
Okay, it's very similar to Jeff for us. It's rooted in data, because that's really the foundation for how sales wants to have better engagement models for customers and clicks and who's looking at what when they have an engagement type of online experience, or supply chain. As it was mentioned, supplies are hard. And so how do you make sure you get the priority set for certain parts in the right order? Or just, like I said, business process reengineering and the data that surrounds all the decision making. I find myself trying to really, I think, scope this all back down to that data transformation that has to happen. And it serves multiple areas in the such, but we really got to make sure we have that foundation set.
Steve.
Yeah, so data is actually a big part of what we're doing, and we're just starting to step into that. We've been using a lot of off-the-shelf services, and we're looking to build our own big data workflows now, so we can own all of that. But the other big thing we're focusing on now is Web3. So the company's made a big bet on Web3. We released our first NFTs last season, sold around 20,000 of those. And we've really gone all down on that and made a bet that Web3, even though there's a little bit of a trough in activity right now, that's going to turn around and really take off.
And that dovetails with another question, but Pritam, where are you in your IT organization investing right now?
So right now we are mainly focused on the interoperability between all the different BSS, OSS, the network management system, because when you talk about turning up service quickly in a short time, we have different equipment vendors, they have different NMSs, and how to tie that together for the NOC to have it on the same screen, right? Plus, from the billing perspective or accounting, we are also in the construction side of the fiber. So how every of all these aspects are going to tie. There's a lot of talks about open networks, and that's going on. But for a provider of our size, which we don't have an R&D department, we really rely on the vendors that we work with. So right now, with the open APIs and scripting and whatnot, we are trying to interop different systems that we have together to be more efficient and talk in the background, because there's a lot of manual work that is going on right now to do the same thing, right? We have some data in the BSS that needs to happen in the OSS, and it's a manual process. How can we use the same data from the system we already have into a different one? So the interoperability challenges, I think that's the critical piece that we are all focused on right now. And that's where will be the focus for next year or two, to make sure everything talks to each other. I don't expect that everything is going to talk to each other, but at least majority of the systems should talk to each other.
This harmonizes with the next question, which would be emerging technologies. So, Pritam, are there technologies you're relying on to start to tackle that integration or the interoperability problem?
We really are more looking into focused on the vendors that we are working and the selections that when we are gonna do with the different equipment vendors that we have, how open their systems are, because we really don't want to be tied to a particular vendor which has a closed system, because that didn't work like that used to work in the past. But now with the open network, it's not gonna work. We need to partner with the right vendor to make that happen. So it's not just the technology, it's also the approach the vendors are going to have. So it's more for me to say that we are focused, or this is what we are planning to do. It's more of a partnership that I see, not just with the equipment vendors, but with also the other service providers that we work, like how open the network is. I think if we figure out a way to make that work, that will. I know there are many of concept that have happened for last 3 to 4 years. I have seen Ciena working with other vendors and doing that. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to achieve that, because that will reduce a lot of time that we do today, like put it. So I think more not network automation, open network is that was I'm hoping from the emerging technology. Definitely the ever-changing new application. I think the low latency application will gonna be hard prioritized with Meta, artificial intelligence that coming into picture. But we are more focused on providing fiber. I think we are putting the right technology from the layer 1 perspective. So once the layer 1 is solved, the more on the layer 2 and the layer 3, how we can enable those to be future-proof, basically.
Got it. So the emerging technology is really the question of how do you influence your vendor ecosystem to create more open standard adoption? And that's the gateway to improved integration, which makes sense. We have similar conversations with our own vendors for sure.
Sure.
Steve had mentioned some of the Web 3.0. I'm curious, Jeff and Craig, what technologies are you watching closely? And sorry, I will ask any of the participants, if you have a question, please go ahead and post that question. We're going to keep talking unless there's a specific question raised, which I'll see. But with that, then I'll turn the question back to technologies.
Yeah, so like Steve, Web3 is a very interesting technology. First in our space, it's really primarily 5G wireless, and I track that as the emerging technology and where we should go. But the second one would be blockchain. And first, I need to explain, the traditional way that wireless operators, service providers deploy the networks, raise capital, buy the equipment, deploy. There's a movement called decentralized wireless now, where people participate in the network, purchase equipment, and you can deploy them much faster and reduce the capital requirements for a service provider. And the key technology, underlying technology that really creates these decentralized wireless networks is the blockchain.
And so the blockchain, do you see that playing any role in any of your contract arrangements? There's been push to put certain kinds of things on the digital ledger too, especially when you talk about easement or access or any of that. Are you looking at blockchain in those areas?
We are. So anything that can be turned into a contract and automated is just a smart contract in the blockchain.
Wow, interesting. What about you, Craig?
Yeah, we've got a few experiments happening. Some more successful than others right now. We've got augmented reality. When we can't travel to a site, we can ship a headset to the site and have a local contractor or an admin of some sort to just do the rack and stack, and we can remotely instruct. We've experimented too with supply chain and being able to do some QA, walk the hall type things where you look at what they're doing to make sure that's working to your standard. That's got some promise. Metaverse, we all kind of chuckle a little bit about that, but in reality for us, that opens up a ton of opportunity for how we engage new recruits in walking the halls, if you will, of Siena, and going up and maybe clicking on a video or maybe a live chat with a person. So we're experimenting with that in job fairs and some customer engagement demos. Network as a service, as I mentioned, I think it's a new one that's really going to be important to solve for, because we already have the storage and compute in cloud, but we don't really have the network like that. And I think there's a lot of hope and anticipation in that. And of course, the hybrid workplace is something that we're all trying to figure out, whether it's campfire video chats and making sure we don't go back to the old norms of walking into an office and closing the door, when the majority now of people are not in an office. And so how do you keep that engagement up at that level that we kind of experience when everyone is quote unquote remote? So we've got a lot of cool things happening, and maybe, in a few more months or quarters, we'll have some really good meaty outcomes that we can even share.
Intriguing. Well, the use of augmented reality or virtual reality, that is interesting. And I'm guessing for Steve in particular, are you exploring that with some of your fan engagement? Has that come up at all?
Yeah, we did. We've actually done some AR. The first couple of seasons we played for football, we placed 180-degree fisheye cameras at different places around the field. Fans could activate those cameras within a certain feature within the app, and they would have virtual scoreboards and a jumbotron within that, so you could essentially watch a game standing on the 15-yard line, for instance, or in the back of the end zone. Constantly looking to push the envelope there. I've got some really interesting ideas in the AR and VR side of things that we just haven't had time to execute against, unfortunately, but certainly part of the roadmap we're moving forward.
I'm curious, how are you finding fan adoption at large for those? They seem that these are still an emerging, XR in general as a family of things, still finding its use cases. How's adoption for some of the early experiments?
Yeah, pretty good. I think part of our challenge has been there's so much going on in our app, it's discovery. So it was certainly a feature that fans gravitated towards. We had some challenges in the UX that we have to work around, but we got nothing but fan feedback. And my personal experience, I mean, we had stuff, like I said, cameras on like the 10-yard line, and being able, when the players are right there and you're watching the play, it's like being on the goal line cam when you're in the NFL. It's really a very different perspective to watch the game from, and very interesting. But we're looking at things like tabletop VR and having avatars for the players competing on your coffee table, and in your family room. Or to Craig's point about metaverse is something we're tracking very closely. I've been talking to some of the metaverse folks. Unfortunately, the tech there doesn't quite support what we want to do, so we're doing a little bit of wait and see there. And I've also been talking to NVIDIA. They've got a platform called Omniverse that they're trying to generate interest on, that does photorealistic 3D rendering in real time. That would be the spectacular tech for some metaverse to adopt. If we had nothing better to do, we build our own metaverse on top of that, but we have other fish to fry right now.
Yeah, so much of what you describe, and all of you, when you're thinking of new technology, the bandwidth consumption just across the whole fabric of our interconnected intercommunity is just erupting in every direction. And the things you described, there's just no way that interconnectivity is not. I mean, we're still, as mature as our technologies are, there's so much, Jeff, you noted this, there is so much greenfield really for what networks need to be able to do as an enabler of some of this. So with a few minutes left, I want to reverse quick round robin. Last thoughts on digital transformation, any nuggets of wisdom or advice that you'd want to offer to any attendees of the webinar, things that you would leave them. And we'll go in reverse. So Steve, I'll start with you, and we'll work backwards from there.
Well, I would say, I mean, I would continue to watch the Web3 stuff. Some people are doomsaying there, but I still think there's a lot of velocity. I mean, if you look at all the cryptocurrencies are on Web3 and what's going on in the NFT space, we're really innovating on the integration between Web3 artifacts and the games and real world. So I think there's a whole lot that can be done there still. And I mean, I've been living in the cloud for 9 years now, but to the extent that people are not paying attention to the big cloud providers and moving their compute workloads there where it makes sense, I think that there's going to continue to be a lot of momentum in that direction. And the advantages to me are obvious and tangible.
Thank you. Jeff, how about you? Nuggets of wisdom or advice?
Yeah, well, I have to echo what Steve said. It really is about Web3 and blockchain, and keep an eye on it. And it goes through its hype cycles and roller coasters, but it is a technology that has a lot of promise, and certainly keep an eye on it.
That's great. Craig.
Well, I don't know about nuggets of wisdom there, but I would tell you, you got to always pay attention to the fundamentals, right? It's easy to get distracted by the shiny objects, the new things that are coming out, without paying attention to the fundamentals of the business. And again, those business transformations of the business processes that you have to pay attention to are fundamentally important, and so is data. But also things that now come around the corner on that is AI and ML and all that good stuff that really can help propel your company. But you got to pay attention to those new things too that might bring new opportunity to the company that maybe hasn't been traditionally served. So again, maybe your recruitment strategy could be an online experience or a job fair experience, or maybe how you engage with your customers could be completely different. I mean, I'm blown away by what Steve is doing with his company, but we also have some simple things that we need to do in our company that could engage our customers a lot differently too. So the whole opportunity is huge. It's just very wide, and you just got to start somewhere.
And pray, Tom.
I don't think I have anything more to add, but I think the digital transformation is critical, and I think the way we should all look at it is in a more positive way. And should not forget the cultural aspect of an organization when we're trying to implement the digital transformation. I think they both go hand in hand. So I think just to be, it's needed, it's necessary, and we need to work on it.
Excellent. Well, and I do think, and I'll echo your final remark, that the human side of all of this digital transformation is the key to the success, I think, of all the software and the engineering. So I want to thank each of the panelists for being with me today. It was a really pleasure to hear from you, to gain nuggets of insight, and thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Thanks, Christoph.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for having us being able to host your webinar today. I really appreciate it. I really hope that everyone else enjoyed as much as we did. I'm going to go ahead and give a close to this webinar. Again, thank you everyone for coming today and attending the webinar. If you registered through VIB with your business email, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact gc@vib.tech. But thank you again so much for everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Cheers.
Thank
you.
you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.